Okay, so when you hear the name Hammurabi, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, it's probably that one phrase, an eye for an eye, right? This idea of brutal, ancient justice. But what if I told you that the image we all have in our heads, the one from history class, is almost completely wrong? Today, we are digging into the real story behind Hammurabi's code. Yeah, you heard that right. Because when you actually strip away the mythology, you find something fascinating. The code wasn't really written to make people moral. It was written to solve a much, much bigger problem, one that, we still grapple with today. What do you do when an economy starts to break?
So we have this myth, this idea that it's all about vengeance and morality. But the reality? Well, it was a practical handbook for a booming economy. It was obsessed with loans, contracts, and debt. And it all boiled down to one single, overriding question. Who pays when things go wrong?
So let's dive into that reality. This thing wasn't some philosophical treatise. It was a deeply pragmatic financial document. Now, the entire code is made up of nearly 300 laws. Not a huge number, really, and they were all carved right into this giant stone pillar for everyone to see. And here's the real kicker. When you break it down, wow, a whopping 85% of those laws have absolutely nothing to do with violent crime. The vast majority were about stuff like loans, wages, interest rates, and liability. The nitty-gritty rules that keep an economy from just spiraling into total chaos. You really have to picture it. Babylon wasn't some quiet little town. It was a commercial machine sitting right at the crossroads of major trade routes. It was this buzzing, thrumming hub of commerce. Grain, silver, labor, all moving through. And to make that work, to scale it up, you need rules everyone can agree on. You need trust. And that gets right to the heart of what Hammurabi was doing. He wasn't trying to engineer good people. He was trying to engineer a predictable economy. Because if there's one thing that just kills trade, it's unpredictability. And what's the fastest way to make things predictable? You define with absolute clarity exactly who is on the hook when something goes sideways. He basically did this by focusing on 3 massive areas. First, managing the absolutely crushing weight of personal debt. Second, enforcing the outcomes of contracts, no excuses. And third, standardizing payments to just smooth everything out. So let's talk about debt for a second. In ancient Mesopotamia, if you were a farmer and your harvest failed, you could lose everything, your land, your kids, your freedom. Now, that wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a systemic threat. You can't run an empire with a nation of debt slaves who can't grow food or pay taxes. The whole thing starts to rot from the inside out. So what did the code do? It capped interest rates. It put limits on debt servitude. But let's be crystal clear here. This wasn't some warm, fuzzy act of mercy. It was cold, calculated risk management. Hammurabi wasn't really protecting the poor. He was protecting the system that fed and funded his empire. It was pure necessity. And then you have contracts. The code here was, brutally simple. It did not care about your good intentions or your excuses. If you're a builder and the house you build collapses and kills the owner, you were put to death. The responsibility was absolute, end of story. And that is the quiet genius of it all. It sounds cruel to us, but what it really is clarity. When the consequences are that black and white, people start to price risk correctly. Builders build better houses. Merchants handle goods more carefully. It actually makes trade safer because everybody knows exactly what the stakes are before they even start. And finally, there were wages. The code laid out fixed payments for ox drivers, for surgeons, for all kinds of craftsmen. And again, the goal wasn't really fairness, it was consistency. Consistency is like the lubricant for an economy. It gets rid of all the endless haggling and arguments that can just grind trade to a halt. But, and this is a huge but, there's a major twist in this whole story. This financial system was never, ever designed to be equal. In fact, you could say its inequality was the entire point. See, the rules were absolutely not the same for everyone. The price you paid for a mistake, or the compensation you got if you were injured, it all hinged on your social status. Power wasn't just a fact of life, it was written directly into the law. Just look at this table. It lays it all out, and it is stark. If you injured a noble person, yep, an eye for an eye. But if you injured a commoner, you just paid a fine in silver. And a slave? You just paid the owner for the damaged property. A surgeon whose noble patient died, he lost his hands. If the patient was a slave, he just had to buy the owner a new one.
It was an asset replacement. And this wasn't a bug in the system, it was a feature. This was the design. The whole thing was built to preserve the hierarchy, to protect the elites, the people who owned the land and the capital. Why? Because their collapse would send shockwaves through the entire economy. The lower classes were, by design, meant to absorb more of the risk. So, at the end of the day, this had nothing to do with fairness or what was right. It was about stability. The system calculated that the most efficient way to protect the whole structure from falling apart was to protect the top. It was just cold, hard arithmetic. And this is where this ancient history might start to feel a little uncomfortably familiar. Because the logic that Hammurabi carved into stone 4,000 years ago is in many ways the very same logic that runs our modern financial systems. Just look at this parallel for a second. It's wild. Problem: mass debt threatens to bring down the whole system. Hammurabi's fix: cap interest rates, forgive some debts. The modern fix: bailouts and debt relief programs. The logic? It is identical. Protect the system, not necessarily the individual. Think about it. Why do we have bankruptcy laws? It's not to reward failure, it's to contain it so it doesn't spread. Why do central banks jump in during a crisis? Not because they love the market, but because an uncontrolled collapse is way worse for everyone. These are just modern echoes of Hammurabi's ancient playbook. But there is one key difference. Babylon was brutally honest about it. The rules were harsh, yeah, but they were carved in stone, right out there in public. Today, that same cold logic is buried deep inside thousands of pages of legal documents and complex financial instruments that, let's be honest, very few of us can actually understand. And that brings us to the ultimate takeaway, right? We often get confused and angry at our financial system because we expect it to be moral. We want it to be fair, but it was never designed for that. Just like Hammurabi's code, it was designed to do one thing above all else: survive. And survival always requires sacrifice. Losses have to go somewhere. So the question that echoed through the streets of ancient Babylon is the exact same one we should be asking ourselves today. When things inevitably go wrong, who does our system decide will pay the price?